The year was 1840. Cambodia was a land without peace, a kingdom without freedom. For decades, the throne of the Khmers had been little more than a pawn in the hands of two hungry neighbors, Siam in the west, Vietnam in the east. Two Ayuthya's heirs in Bangkok, Cambodia was a buffer zone, a shield against Vietnamese expansion. To the new emperors of Hue, it was a vassal to be molded in their image. And to the Cambodian people, it was home one that bled with each passing invasion. That year, rebellion erupted. The Cambodian queen, Regent Ang May, placed on the throne by the Vietnamese, faced uprisings fueled by Siamese-backed factions. A storm was coming, a war that would rage across rivers, forests, and temples. A war in which Cambodia itself would be the battlefield, its soil once again soaked with blood, not of its choosing. Part 1. The Rebellion of 1840. The year was 1840. And Cambodia was once again standing at the crossroads of survival. Its soil was soaked with the memories of invasions, betrayals, and forced subjugation. The once great kingdom that had ruled over Angkor centuries earlier was now but a shadow, trapped in the iron grip of two rival powers, Siam to the west and Vietnam to the east. For decades, Cambodia had been caught in this merciless tug-of-war, its monarchs reduced to pawns, its nobility stripped of autonomy, and its people forced to endure the crushing weight of foreign domination. Yet, in 1840, something stirred. A spark of rebellion was ignited, one that would explode into the Second Siamese-Vietnamese War over Cambodia, a conflict that would engulf the land in blood, fire, and devastation. To understand why this war broke out, one must go back to the uneasy decades leading up to it. After the 1831-34 Siamese-Vietnamese War, Cambodia had fallen firmly under Vietnamese domination. The Nguyen dynasty of Vietnam, led by Emperor Minh Men, had asserted near-total control over Cambodian politics and society. King Ang Chan II, who had long been a Vietnamese puppet, died in 1834 without a male heir. His daughters, Princess Ang May and her sisters, became the symbolic rulers of Cambodia, but the real power lay in the hands of Vietnamese governors and soldiers. For the Nguyen court, Cambodia was not simply a vassalate, it was a land to be reshaped in Vietnam's image. The Vietnamese occupation was more than military. It was cultural, administrative, and suffocating. Vietnamese officials imposed strict reforms on Cambodian life. Cambodian laws, traditions, and ceremonies were suppressed in favor of Vietnamese customs. The Cambodian royal court was stripped of its independence, and Vietnamese mandarins governed directly from Phnom Penh. Even Cambodian religious life was interfered with. Pagodas and Buddhist monks were pressured under Vietnamese authority. Their autonomy diminished, their rituals carefully monitored. The Nguyen dynasty sought to erase the distinctiveness of Cambodia, transforming it into a subordinate province of the empire. For the Cambodian people, this was not liberation but humiliation. While Siamese domination had often come through violence, deportation, and plunder, the Vietnamese approach cut deeper into the cultural heart of the nation. Cambodian nobles, once proud and influential, now found themselves powerless. Families who had for centuries tied their identity to the land, the monarchy, and Buddhism were forced to watch as their traditions were rewritten by foreign rulers. Farmers, monks, and villagers whispered resentment, their anger simmering beneath the surface. The flame of rebellion was inevitable, it only needed a spark. That spark came in 1840, when Emperor Minh Men made a decision that would inflame Cambodian anger beyond control. In an attempt to solidify Vietnamese rule, he forced the Cambodian royal princess Ang May to be crowned as queen under Vietnamese protection. Though Ang May was of royal blood, she was seen by most Cambodians as a puppet of Hue, a ruler with no power of her own, controlled by the Nguyen court. The idea of a Cambodian monarch unable to protect her people, unable to make decisions without Vietnamese approval, was an unbearable humiliation. The Cambodian nobility, already resentful of their loss of influence, erupted in protest. Several local leaders declared outright defiance. calling on the people to resist Vietnamese rule. Buddhist monks, who had long been the guardians of Cambodia's spirit, rallied the villagers with sermons that condemned the loss of independence. From the countryside to the royal court, voices of resistance began to merge into a single cry: Cambodia must be free again. The rebellion began quietly at first. Local uprisings broke out in provinces far from the Vietnamese garrisons, where peasants and monks took up weapons against Vietnamese officials. Ambushes and raids harassed supply lines. Small garrisons were attacked at night, and Vietnamese soldiers found themselves hated in every village they entered. The anger was not just about politics, it was about survival, dignity, and the very soul of Cambodia. As the rebellion spread, Cambodian nobles who had been marginalized by Vietnamese rule seized the opportunity to reclaim their influence. They united with the people, calling on ancient traditions and national pride to justify their revolt. Some leaders declared that Cambodia must restore its independence under a strong king, not a puppet queen installed by Vietnam. Others appealed to Buddhism, portraying the rebellion as a sacred duty to protect the faith from foreign desecration. Vietnam's response was swift and brutal. Emperor Minh Men dispatched more soldiers into Cambodia, ordering them to crush the rebellion without mercy. Vietnamese troops stormed villages suspected of harboring rebels, burned homes, and executed suspected leaders. Buddhist monks accused of encouraging resistance were dragged from their monasteries and put to death. The brutality only deepened Cambodian hatred and drove more people into rebellion. In this chaos, another player entered the scene: Siam. The court of Bangkok, ruled by King Rama III, had watched Cambodia's suffering with cold calculation. For decades, Siam had sought to dominate Cambodia, to keep it as a buffer state against Vietnamese expansion. The rebellion of 1840 provided the perfect chance for Siam to strike. To Rama III and his ministers, Cambodia was not just a neighbor in distress, it was an opportunity. Siamese envoys made contact with Cambodian rebels, promising military support and the restoration of a Cambodian king loyal to Bangkok. For many Cambodian nobles, the choice was agonizing. On one side was Vietnam, which had humiliated and suffocated Cambodia with foreign customs and puppet queens. On the other side was Siam, which had a long history of invasions, plunder, and deportations of Khmer people into slavery. Cambodia was once again trapped between two predators, but the desperate situation forced many to turn toward Siam as the lesser evil, at least for the moment. By late 1840, Siam began preparing for war. The rebellion in Cambodia had already weakened Vietnamese control, and Bangkok saw the chance to overthrow Vietnam's dominance. Siamese generals were instructed to raise armies and prepare for an invasion, one that would sweep across Cambodia and install a ruler favorable to Siamese interests. The Cambodian rebels were to be used as allies, but everyone knew the truth. Siam was not fighting for Cambodia's freedom, it was fighting for Cambodia's submission. The stage was now set for a new war, one that would once again devastate Cambodia. The land was already scarred by past invasions, but the conflict that began in 1840 would be even bloodier, even more destructive. It would pit Cambodian rebels, desperate for independence, against the full might of the Vietnamese army, and into this crucible of suffering, Siam would march, promising salvation but bringing only another form of domination. As the year ended, Cambodia stood on the brink of disaster. Villages burned in the countryside. Vietnamese soldiers tightened their grip on Phnom Penh. Cambodian rebels rallied under banners of independence, vowing to fight to the death. And far to the west, in the palaces of Bangkok, Siamese generals sharpened their swords, ready to exploit Cambodia's desperation for their own imperial ambitions. This was the rebellion of 1840. It was not just a local uprising. It was the beginning of a war that would engulf all of Cambodia. A war fought not for the people, but over them. A war in which Cambodia, once again, would become the battlefield of giants. The Cambodian people had risen up, not out of choice, but out of desperation. They did not fight because they wanted Siam's help, nor because they wished to embrace Vietnamese customs. They fought because their spirit, their dignity, and their very identity were being crushed. But as history had shown again and again, the struggle for independence in Cambodia was rarely free from foreign manipulation. And so, in the chaos of rebellion, two predators closed in. Vietnam sought to reassert its control. Siam sought to seize its opportunity. And Cambodia, the eternal victim of its geography, stood alone at the center of their ambitions. The rebellion of 1840 was both a cry of defiance and a cry of despair. It was a flame of resistance that could not be extinguished, even when surrounded by overwhelming powers. But it was also the opening act of a far greater tragedy, the Second Siamese-Vietnamese War over Cambodia, a conflict that would leave the land scarred and broken, and its people once again caught in the crossfire of empires. And so the story continues, from rebellion to war, from defiance to devastation. Cambodia had risen against its chains, but the chains were not yet broken. Instead, they were about to tighten as the storm of war gathered, preparing to sweep the land in fire. This was the beginning of the Cambodian tragedy of the 1840s, a tragedy written in rebellion, betrayal, and blood. A tragedy where every step forward seemed to lead only deeper into darkness. Part 2. The Storm of 1841. The Cambodian rebellion that erupted in late 1840 did not die with its first sparks. Instead, it grew into a wildfire. The Cambodian countryside, weary from years of humiliation and suppression under Vietnamese rule, rose in defiance. Villages that once lay silent under Vietnamese administrators now echoed with the sound of sharpened spears, of hastily raised war cries, of Buddhist monks urging resistance. What began as isolated revolts against Vietnamese garrisons soon escalated into an open national uprising, one that would catch the attention of Siam, the ever-watchful neighbor to the west, and one that would plunge Cambodia into the full chaos of war. To understand the storm of 1841, one must first see the desperation that birthed it. After Ang Chan II's death in 1834, Cambodia had effectively ceased to be independent. The Vietnamese, determined to fold the Khmer kingdom into their sphere, had installed Princess Ang May as queen, but stripped her of any real power. Instead, governors from Huc dominated court life. Vietnamese officials dictated law, collected taxes, conscripted labor, and went further still, they sought to transform Cambodian identity itself. Vietnamese language was promoted at court. Cambodian officials were expected to adopt Vietnamese dress, and even Khmer traditions were branded as backward, in need of civilizing. What to the Vietnamese court seemed like assimilation, to Cambodians was nothing less than cultural suffocation. Ang May, young and powerless, became a symbol not of Khmer sovereignty but of Khmer subjugation. By 1840, anger had boiled past containment. That year, a wave of violent uprisings tore through the countryside. Cambodian villagers rose against Vietnamese stations, burned government buildings, and assassinated local officials. Vietnamese garrisons, overstretched and unpopular, often retreated into fortified towns, unable to control the countryside. The rebellion spread from Battambang to Pursat, from Kompong Chenang to Takeo. Cambodia, once suffocated by silence, now roared with rage. The Vietnamese response was brutal. Troops were dispatched from An Giang and Gia Hun to crush the insurrection. Villages suspected of harboring rebels were torched. Buddhist monasteries accused of supporting insurgents were desecrated, and Khmer civilians were executed in reprisals. Yet the harder the Vietnamese cracked down, the more determined the Cambodians became. And in that storm of blood and fire, the shadow of Siam fell once more over the land. To the Siamese court in Bangkok, the turmoil was both an opportunity and a danger. Cambodia had long been the battlefield of Siamese and Vietnamese ambitions. Now, with rebellion spreading and Vietnamese control faltering, Siam saw its chance to restore its influence. King Rama III and his generals recognized the strategic value. If Cambodia were wrested from Vietnam's grip, it could once again serve as a buffer protecting Siam's eastern frontier, a vassal kingdom friendly to Bangkok. To accomplish this, Siam needed more than soldiers, it needed legitimacy. That legitimacy came in the form of Khmer princes. For years, several royal sons of Angchan II had lived in Bangkok, effectively as political hostages, but also as instruments of Siamese strategy. Chief among them was Prince Ang Duong, who would later become one of Cambodia's most important kings. Siam positioned these princes as the true heirs to the Khmer throne, contrasting them against the powerless Angmei under Vietnamese custody. In early 1841, Bangkok made its move. Siamese forces began massing at the frontier in the provinces of Battambang and Chanthaburi, which Siam had held since earlier conflicts. Under the command of Chow Phraya Bodhindika, a seasoned general with a fearsome reputation, the armies prepared to march eastward into Cambodia proper. The plan was straightforward: ally with the Cambodian rebels, proclaim a prince as rightful king, and drive out the Vietnamese. But while simple in concept, the campaign would open a brutal new chapter of suffering for the Khmer, people caught between two great powers. As Bodhindika advanced, the Cambodian rebels initially welcomed Siamese support. Supplies of weapons, rice, and manpower flowed in, and for the first time, the uprising seemed capable of more than local victories. In province after province, Vietnamese positions were attacked, and for a brief moment, it appeared that Vietnamese authority might crumble. But the Vietnamese Empire was not prepared to abandon its hold, so its Sili, Emperor Thu Trop, who had ascended the throne after Minh Mang's death in 1841, faced the Cambodian rebellion as his first great challenge. Determined to uphold his father's policy of controlling Cambodia, he ordered reinforcements from southern Vietnam and launched major counter-campaigns. By mid-1841, the war in Cambodia was no longer a rebellion, it was a full-scale conflict between Siam and Vietnam, fought on Cambodian soil, with Cambodians paying the heaviest price. The battles of that year were savage. Vietnamese forces entrenched themselves in Phnom Penh and the eastern provinces, while Siamese troops advanced from the west. The Khmer countryside became a no-man's land, its people trapped between armies. Villages were pillaged not once but twice, first by Siamese troops demanding supplies, then by Vietnamese troops punishing suspected collaboration. Khmer civilians, already exhausted from years of oppression, now faced famine, disease, and endless violence. Contemporary records tell of entire villages abandoned, of monks fleeing temples with sacred texts hidden under their robes, of peasants wandering into forests to escape conscription or massacre. The storm of 1841 was not just a war of armies, it was a war of annihilation for the ordinary people. Yet the Khmer rebels, despite suffering, remained defiant. Monks turned monasteries into secret meeting places. Villagers smuggled food to guerrilla bands. Cambodian leaders coordinated with Siamese commanders, while still trying to preserve their autonomy. The rebellion had unleashed a sense of national identity that even foreign domination could not fully erase. But Siam's intervention was not purely altruistic. While Cambodian rebels fought for freedom, Siam fought for dominance. The princes promoted by Bangkok were expected to be pliant rulers, loyal not to Cambodia but to Siam. Thus, even as Cambodians fought against Vietnam, many realized they were exchanging one master for another. That realization deepened the tragedy of the war. Cambodia's rebellion, born from a desire for independence, became the arena for foreign ambitions. One of the defining clashes of 1841 occurred near Odong, the traditional Khmer capital north of Phnom Penh. Siamese-supported forces sought to seize the city, hoping to proclaim it as the base of a new Khmer monarch loyal to Bangkok. Vietnamese defenders, reinforced by troops from Jiahan, resisted fiercely. The battle raged for weeks, with heavy casualties on both sides. When the smoke cleared, Odong lay devastated. its palaces damaged, its people scattered. Neither side gained a decisive hold, but Cambodia's heartland bled. By the end of 1841, the war had reached a grim stalemate. Vietnamese forces retained Phnom Penh and much of eastern Cambodia, while Siamese forces and their Khmer allies controlled the western regions around Battambang and Pursat. The rebellion that had started as a cry of freedom had now split Cambodia in two, its throne contested, its people suffering under rival foreign patrons. And yet, amidst the storm, a figure began to emerge, Prince Ang Duong, sheltered under Siamese protection, increasingly seen as the Khmer prince, who might one day unify the kingdom. For now, however, 1841 ended not with resolution, but with ruin. The Cambodian countryside lay shattered. The rebellion had not been crushed, but it had not triumphed either. Instead, Cambodia stood at the center of a grinding war between Siam and Vietnam, each determined to bend it to their will. The storm of 1841 was the crucible that set the stage for the long struggle to come, a struggle in which Cambodia's throne would be fought over, its cities burned, its people scattered, until exhaustion forced both Siam and Vietnam to seek uneasy compromise. In the annals of Khmer history, the rebellion of 1840 and the storm of 1841 are remembered not only as years of suffering, but as testimony to resilience. For even in the darkest hour, when foreign armies trampled the land and rival empires carved it apart, the spirit of Cambodia endured. The monks still chanted in hidden temples, the villagers still clung to their rice fields, and the name of Cambodia was not erased, though both Siam and Vietnam tried to claim it. That endurance would carry forward, shaping the next phase of the conflict, and ensuring that when peace did come, however fragile, Cambodia would not vanish from the map. Instead, it would survive to fight another day. Part 3. The Settlement of Shadows. The war that had erupted in 1840 and raged into 1841 left Cambodia once again the unfortunate stage upon which greater powers fought their duels. By 1842, Siamese armies marched deep into Cambodian territory, propping up their chosen claimant, while Vietnamese counteroffensives pressed from the east. Cambodian villages and cities were turned into pawns on a bloody chessboard, and the land itself became the price of foreign ambition. The rebellion that had begun as a cry for dignity had now transformed into a theater of exhaustion, fear, and betrayal. In this final act of the war, we explore how the storm subsided, not through Cambodian triumph, but through foreign bargains that drew borders in shadows and forced a kingdom to live once more in chains. The fragmented kingdom. By 1842, Cambodia was a land in ruin. Battambang and Siem Reap, long claimed by Siam, were already firmly under Bangkok's grip. Vietnamese forces had retreated momentarily after the deaths of Emperor Minh Men and the earlier defeats of their garrisons, but they had not disappeared. Cambodia's rebellion against Vietnamese cultural assimilation, forced haircuts, clothing mandates, and even the attempted erasure of Khmer court rituals had unleashed a torrent of resentment. Yet Cambodians found themselves unable to translate their fury into independence. Both Siam and Vietnam courted Khmer princes, bribing nobles and threatening villagers to pledge loyalty. Prince Ang May, once installed as queen by the Vietnamese, had lost her authority. Other princes were caught between rival camps. The monarchy, once sacred and unifying, now became fractured, reduced to a phantom crown wielded as a weapon by outsiders. Siam's hollow occupation, the Siamese armies, led by their generals and backed by supplies from Bangkok, attempted to install Ang Duong as king. Ang Duong, who had lived in exile in Bangkok, became Siam's most valuable pawn. Yet his legitimacy among Cambodians was fragile. Too many villagers, he was seen as a foreign-backed pretender, a puppet carried by Siamese swords. While Siamese forces could march into Phnom Penh and raise their banners, their control evaporated once armies moved on. Vietnamese loyalists, both officials and Khmer collaborators, would reappear, raising resistance and undermining Siam's fragile grasp. Cambodia thus became a land of two competing shadows: Siam's military authority by day, Vietnam's political grip by night. The return of Vietnam's might. In 1843, Vietnam began to recover its strength. Emperor Theodore, successor to Minh Men, dispatched generals to restore Vietnamese dominance in Cambodia. Unlike the rigid assimilationist policies of Minh Men, Theodore calculated that compromise would be necessary. He sought to rally Cambodians, not by crushing their customs, but by presenting Vietnam as the rightful guarantor of Cambodia's throne. This shift in strategy undermined Siam's occupation. As Vietnamese armies advanced westward, Cambodian villages, exhausted from Siam's requisitions and brutality, often reopened their gates to Vietnamese officials. The war, once framed as Cambodian resistance to Vietnam, had transformed into a bloody tug-of-war, in which neither foreign power gave Cambodians genuine sovereignty. Cambodia as a battlefield of shadows. The campaigns of 1843 and 1844 devastated the Cambodian countryside. Fields were burned, temples looted, and ordinary villagers killed or conscripted. Both Siamese and Vietnamese armies relied on forced labor, exacted supplies from peasants, and punished any suspected sympathizers of the enemy. In some regions, entire populations fled into forests or across borders, abandoning rice fields to weeds and temples to decay. The rebellion that had begun with noble intentions, defiance against Vietnam as oppression, had now spiraled into an endless cycle of violence, in which Cambodians bore the heaviest price. Independence, which had seemed briefly possible in 1840, now faded into a mirage. Diplomatic shadows. By 1845, both Siam and Vietnam had reached exhaustion. Siam, despite its occupation of parts of Cambodia, faced logistical nightmares. The farther their armies marched from Bangkok, the more supplies dwindled, and disease claimed thousands. Vietnam, while regaining control, found that the rebellion had permanently weakened its ability to fully assimilate Cambodia. Neither side could secure a decisive victory. Thus began the shadow diplomacy of 1845. Envoys traveled between Hue and Bangkok, not to ask Cambodia what it desired, but to negotiate Cambodia's fate between themselves. For Cambodia, this was the cruelest truth. Its sovereignty was not determined in Phnom Penh or Odong, but in the palaces of its neighbors. The Compromise of 1846, the settlement that emerged in 1846, was a bitter pill for Cambodians. Vietnam agreed to reinstall Ang Duong as king, but under the condition that Cambodia would remain a vassal state. Sending tribute to Hue, Siam, unwilling to see its efforts wasted, accepted the compromise so long as its influence in western Cambodia, particularly Battambang and Siem Reap, remained uncontested. Cambodia thus emerged from the war with a monarch but without true independence. Ang Duong ascended the throne, but he was bound in golden chains. He owed his crown to Vietnam's grace and remained watched by Siam's shadow. Cambodia's sovereignty was not restored. It was partitioned in spirit, if not in map, between two predators, the Phantom Crown. The throne of Cambodia in 1846 was both real and illusory. Ang Duong, though king, lacked freedom of action. His court was filled with spies, his movements monitored, his decisions constrained by fear of angering either Siam or Vietnam. He wore the royal regalia, but each jewel was tainted by foreign hands. This phantom crown symbolized Cambodia's plight in the 19th century, the illusion of monarchy, but the reality of vassalage. Cambodia had fought bravely in rebellion, endured foreign invasions, and survived years of war. Yet its outcome was not liberation, but a settlement that kept it shackled. The human cost. Behind the shifting banners of Siam and Vietnam lay the suffering of ordinary Cambodians. Thousands had been killed, countless more displaced. Villages had been razed, children orphaned, monks scattered from their monasteries. The scars of the war ran deep, not only in ruined rice fields, but in the collective memory of a nation that had once dreamed of standing free. The second major war over Cambodia's throne was not remembered as a triumph, but as a winter reminder of how easily the kingdom could be reduced to prey in the games of stronger neighbors. Shadows into the future. The war's settlement set the stage for Cambodia's future struggles. Ang Duong, despite his constrained reign, would later attempt to seek help from France, laying the groundwork for the colonial entanglements of the 1860s. The lesson of the 1840–45 conflict was clear. Cambodia, left alone, could not resist the might of Siam and Vietnam. It needed an external guarantor, but the price of that protection would ultimately be another kind of subjugation, colonial rule. Thus, the shadows of the war stretched forward into the 19th century, shaping Cambodia's tragic destiny. The settlement of shadows. The War of 1840–45 began as a rebellion for dignity, a defiance against forced assimilation and cultural erasure. It grew into a full-scale conflict as Siam seized the opportunity to strike, and it ended not with liberation, but with compromise. The Cambodian throne was restored in name but hollow in power. The people, who had risen with courage, found themselves once again pawns in a struggle not of their choosing. This is the haunting legacy of the second major war for Cambodia's throne, a war that promised hope, delivered blood, and settled in shadows. Cambodia survived, but survival was not the same as freedom. It was a kingdom alive, yet bound, wearing a crown of ghosts. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.